painters in the group have reported to me that they'll be somewhere else in LA, and someone will say, what do you do? And they say, I'm involved in Pharmaca, this gallery. And they went, I came there to a poetry reading. And they're kind of pleased and appalled at the same time, to tell you the truth. But the fact that people come in and the shows turn over, it means that if people do come regularly, they do see different shows. And it's weird because
which is a nice
the paintings obviously change with the words that are being said in the room. And over the course of an evening with 4 different poets, the rooms seems to change. The paintings themselves take on a different context. It's a nice arena all around. It's
like two words,
very symbiotic.
Two words coming together, and they create a third
area.
Yeah,
and there's this, there's Chris and Pharmaca had been thinking about having a poetry series here, and so he said, "Can you help with it?" And I was really flattered to be asked, and I also thought, I'm so overwhelmed, I can't do one more thing. So then I started having these conversations with Tess Latta and Stephanie Prodromides and Frankie Dreas and Dina Hardy, and then later Jen Wesley when she came back from Austin. And now we have an intern, Colleen Ware, who was one of my students when she was at LMU. And I knew all of these people for years, knew their poetry. They had experience hosting and editing, and their poetry's getting out into the world.
What was the first reading?
July.
July.
The one that you were in, yeah.
And how often do you have the readings?
Once a month.
Once a month.
Usually.
There are many poetry readings in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. What's different about this poetry reading, the third area reading series?
We try to usually do foursomes, unless there's we just had an anthology celebration in February where we were celebrating the best American erotic poems, 1800 to the present, and there were 11 readers, some of whom had work in the anthology, some of whom were impersonating people in the anthology and reading their own work. But it's usually 4, and each one is individually introduced by a different member of our kind of curating collective. With all of the intros are different. They're kind of quirky. They're not just straight bios. People actually read or sometimes even interview the guests, and each one of them has a different flavor. And I think there's something about this space that makes for a really intimate reading. The readers generally are right over there, and everybody's gathered around them very closely. We have nice, sometimes organic vino and nibbles of various kinds for people, and a wonderful audience has been coming. A lot of really fine poets in the area, some of whom have also read here but come to listen to each other read, and some people for whom it's the first poetry reading. And there's this beautiful intimacy.
And who came up with the name of the third area?
So there was this moment, there was this big meeting down here last June, where at that moment it was Tess and Steph and me and like 12 painters in a circle with a bunch of chips and Coca-Cola in the middle or something. But we came down here a week before that, and Chris was telling us this story.
Well, I taught for my sins at a kind of fairly radical art school in Britain, and the art school was painting, sculpture, and then what was called the third area, where I taught. And the third area was everything that was not painting or sculpture. And my students were techno rock musicians, performance artists, filmmakers, everything but. So third area seemed to cover that which was not painting or sculpture.
Right. So for some reason it was a phrase that all of us sort of glommed onto. And when we were beginning to meet as a collective, coming down to this collective, we were thinking about it. And these are some of the things that sort of magnetized around the idea of the third area. It's a monthly reading series celebrating some of the most vibrant new work by local, regional, national, and hopefully international poets. Mariano, you're an international poet, both established and emerging. And we're trying to bring a slightly different aesthetic bouquet every month. I've gotten into this thing of thinking of these as bouquets. So one month maybe roses, the next kumquats and birds of paradise. Maybe we have a month of cedar and Spanish moss, and the next month white lilies spiked with penguins. So over time, there are all of these different aesthetics coming in. We've had people read here from the ages of about somewhere in their 20s to almost 80. So there's a lot of variety. And so these are some things that came toward us as we were thinking about what is the third area. This is from Lorca, around 1930. Poetry isn't meant to be understood, but to be received in a state of grace. No one should say this is clear, because poetry is obscure. And no one should say this is obscure, because poetry is clear. What we need to do is search out poetry energetically and virtuously so that it will surrender to us. But we need to have forgotten poetry completely before it can fall naked into our arms. And then here's Alice Fulton. This is from an interview that she did in the Writer's Chronicle in 1998. What comes between two things is the quality of thirdness. It can be an interruption, it can be a cushion, but I see it as a rebellious force, something that breaks up binary thinking, positions such as self and other, the mind-body separation, all the classic dualisms. If you mix a third into it, then you have a more pluralistic and less stable structure with less equilibrium. I'm interested in what comes between two things and pushes them a little bit off balance. And then finally, Donald Winnicott, and this is more psychological. There is the third part of the life of a human being, a part that we cannot ignore, an intermediate area of experiencing to which inner reality and external life both contribute. It is an area which is not challenged, because no claim is made on its behalf, except that it shall exist as a resting place for the individual engaged in the perpetual human task of keeping inner and outer reality separate yet interrelated. This third area might turn out to be the cultural life of the individual. So,
could you mention some of the names that
of people who've been reading here? Yeah, we've had. I think our first year we'll have somewhere between 56 and 60 people who have read in the series, and I'm obsessed with trying to mention everyone who's read here.
Could we scroll the names up? Could we do a scroll?
Probably. Can we do something like that? A scroll of the names who've read here at some point? That would be nice. Great.
I have a question for you, Sarah. What's the connection between your work as a poet and your work as a curator of poetry here? How do they talk to each other?
First of all, really unexpected, because I hadn't been planning to do this. But I think maybe partly because I really like being in the liminal, paradoxical areas of things, where the borders start to meld with one another or melt into each other. I like the sense of this mixture of aesthetics over time that's inclusive and sort of informative, reverberating.
Do you have other programs in Pharmaca or other activities?
The second Thursday of every month is the Downtown Art Walk, where all the galleries are open late. And that's getting a little out of hand. I mean, it's great, and it's also a curse. We get about 3,000 people through here.
It's amazing.
If you want to see a scene that happens nowhere else in LA, it's here.
Yeah.
I came this week, and I found 6 galleries I didn't know were here. I mean, the rate of change is kind of extraordinary, especially given the economic climate. I don't understand where they're all coming from, and it's a mob scene. It's Main Street, Spring Street, as far across as Broadway, kind of 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th Street. Mocha is open late that night.